Hi, everyone. Since last October, I've been haunted by her. I've never met her, nor do I really know what she looks like. But I've heard her story many, many times in more or less the same words, and always with the same conclusion. And frankly, she haunts me. You see, the year was 1967, and the Six-Day War had broken out on all fronts, including in Yerushalayim. Bombs and explosions were falling, and shooting was happening everywhere, especially near the then Israeli Jordanian border in Yerushalayim. Without the benefits of bomb shelters the way they're currently constructed in the buildings in Israel, many in the greater Mea Shearim neighborhoods congregated in the largest and assumed to be most secure, low level reinforced space in the area, the dining room of the Mirror Yeshiva. There, the Talmidim, the students, the Rebbeim, the teachers, and the Rosh Yeshiva and their families, together with community people, gathered and said Tehillim with a complete and total faith. Gedolei Torah, the Torah giants, turned and poured their hearts out to Hashem. The surrealness of the moments were not lost, and I imagine that if one needed to seek spiritual safety anywhere in the world, it would have been in the company of the people right there. Imagine the merits of the people surrounding you, the hours of Torah dedication, the leadership of Judaism worldwide, opening their hearts and soul purely to Hashem. I know they say there are no atheists in foxholes, but in my mind, better the bomb shelter of Mir than the foxhole anywhere. But notwithstanding, the explosions were loud, and the people were scared, all of them. Suddenly, one of the community members, a poor woman who had been in Aguna, who was tortured by her husband, who left her penniless to the point that she eked out a living doing laundry for the students at Mir, cried out, Ribono Shel Olam, Master of the Universe. I've been married and divorced, and during my marriage, my husband treated me terribly for many years, abusing me and humiliating me in public. But now I'm prepared to forgive him. And I pray that you, Hashem, will then similarly forgive the Jewish people for whatever sins of theirs are causing the present suffering. Rav Chaim Shmulevitz, Rosh Yeshiva of the Mir, overheard this woman and told his Talmidim that if they make it out alive, and at that point he was convinced that they would, it would not be in the merit of their tefillos and their Torah study. Rather, he told them, in the merit of this woman, the Yeshua for all of Am Yisrael will come. The salvation for the entire Jewish people would be because of this woman. He would repeat that belief often in the subsequent years when discussing the episode. That woman has been on my mind since last October, and her story has only gotten bigger in the last few weeks of Elul and the Aseres Yemei Tshuva, and has been an image and a role model for me to consider, especially now, as we're about to enter Yom Kippurim. You see, she bargained with Hashem, and she won. And I want to know how. And I think the answer to me is to be found in the fact that in those big moments in life, she used her humility to turn her smallness into big, great things. Let me explain, but this time in 3 different ways. When I heard the story most recently from Reb Zilberstein last October, he added to the story. He told us that Reb Chaim Shmulevitz had told his Talmidim at the time that this one woman's act of Shviras Amidos, the way that she overpowered her natural inclination to hold on to bitterness and resentment, could save more Jews than the tefillos of an entire yeshiva. That's the special power, Reb Zilberstein said, of Shviras Hamidos, of breaking one's nature. Think about it. The secret to overcoming resentment is part of the yearly ritual of the Avodah of Yom Kippurim, especially during the Second Temple era. Indeed, the Mishnah Yuma describes in detail how on Erev Yom Kippur, just as the holiest and busiest day of the Kohen Gadol's year was about to begin, the Beis Din needed to administer an oath to him that he not deviate one iota from the halachically prescribed way of performing the service. Yes, it was necessary to administer the oath because the Sadducees had infiltrated the Beis Hamikdash and instituted unacceptable reforms. But the need to publicly accuse the Kohen Gadol of being a Sadducee was humiliating, to the point that this was the only part of the Yom Kippur service that the Mishnah records anyone crying at. But what's incredible to me, though, is that after all of the public humiliation, the Kohen Gadol immediately proceeded to work on behalf of the entire nation through the Avoda service. He put his life down on the line for the nation, including the very people who had just accused him. It's another example of Shviras Hamidos, of sacrificing one's inner character traits, in this case, the man's pride, for the sake of Hashem and his mitzvos. And when he spoke last October, Rabbi Zilberstein added that the Talmud notes that Kol HaMavir Al Midosav, anyone who is Mavir on his Midos, who overcomes his natural inclinations, Mavir and Lo Al Kol Pisha'av, will be forgiven for all of his sins. And so he urged the Jews around the world, especially after October 7th, to work on this and to contribute to the Yeshua, to the salvation that we all await, just like the woman did. I've been thinking about that woman and that message since that last October, seeing the importance of the contribution of Jews around the world can make as our brothers and sisters constantly run to bomb shelters, and we sit here helpless. I know it's more powerful than anything else. I just didn't know how to break the midah, or even how to identify it fairly. And so I spent a lot of time trying to think of something more, which led me to point number 2. Don't be reactive. You see, I had never heard the woman's declaration, but it had been ringing in my mind as if I could have. The Mishnah describes another aspect of the Avodah of Yom Kippur where voices are heard. After sticking his hands into the lottery box, the Kohen Gadol designates one of the goats set aside for the day as the Gorah LaHashem. In fact, he's supposed to call out LaHashem Chatas. It's fascinating that he makes that declaration out loud, because the Pesikta is clear that one's not normally to use the name of Hashem when declaring a korban. It would be as if one would be uttering Hashem's name in vain. And yet, on Yom Kippurim, not only does the Kohen Gadol call out LaHashem Chatas, the Medrash tells us that his voice making that declaration would travel all the way to Yericho when doing so. Why was that necessary? Perhaps it would help if we recognize that the only other time we find a chatas being dedicated LaHashem is the chatas that's offered on Rosh Chodesh. The Gemara in Chulin tells us that Hashem wanted this chatas brought to atone for the fact that he, Hashem, had to shrink the moon. It seems that the moon and the sun were originally both the same size, but the moon complained to Hashem that one of them should be made smaller. And Hashem said, "You're right. Maybe it's you, the moon, who should shrink yourself." Why did Hashem shrink the moon and not the sun? So the Dasakanim explains that the sun heard its embarrassment and decided not to respond. He demonstrated his greatness is not in responding to the charges of his inadequacy. Rabbi Yaakov Haber, a terrific Rav from Ramat Beit Shemesh, once commented that someone who bases his life on the Torah doesn't ever have to react to anyone. You see, he or she has his or her own standards and values, which are secure, and no one on earth can dislodge him from them, least of all, someone who's low enough to insult him. The Maharal adds that when one brings a korban, it's a description of his awareness that through the sin, he has distanced himself from Hashem, and through korban, from the word karov, to become close, the person humbles himself towards Hashem and greater purpose in life. And so thus, the sin is expunged. And so when it comes to Yom Kippur, the awareness of the korban for Hashem helps create an opportunity for a reprogramming of all of our paths to Hashem. And so hence the declaration is made aloud to humble each person and the entire nation to remind themselves of why we exist and do that which we do, leaving no actual room for actual insult. And maybe that was the realization that the woman had as she pleaded and bargained with Hashem in the bomb shelter in 67. After all the pain, the humiliation, the hurt, the betrayal, and the extreme disappointment in the path or in the people in her life to that point, she knew that the end of her story was not going to be powerless on the floor of a bomb shelter hiding from Jordanian artillery. And so thus she brought the only korban she had to offer there, those very emotions and those experiences. And she turned them to Hashem. She didn't react to her husband. She davened to Hashem instead, and she forgave. asking Hashem to do the same and to be close to his people. And maybe that's another great message to strive for. I want to think a lot about that woman. But even the great Mirror Rosh Hashiva recognized that she alone, of all the people in the bomb shelter, offered the merit for salvation. How can you and I learn from her lessons on a practical level? How can we learn to forgive the way that she did? Which brings me to my final point, number 3. Forgiveness is beneficial for our bodies and our souls. I think it might be helpful for us to realize that when we forgive, we open our world too. Studies have shown that burn victims who openly forgive those in their lives who wrong them have skin grafts that improve better than their counterparts. Those in diverse areas like drug rehabilitation, victims of domestic violence, terminal cancer, all did better in both psychological and emotional functioning when they were able to forgive, as opposed to their counterparts who were not. And also, it's been shown that when we dwell on wrongs done to us, we release chemicals that are associated with the fight, flight, or freeze response, which leads to increases in the anxiety and depression. Yes, my dear friends, when we hold on to the pain and refuse the forgiveness, it's not healthy and it's not good for us. And so why do we do it? We don't want to forgive because we want those around us to know our pain. We want a testimony that something occurred and we were wronged unfairly, and there should be justice and accounting for that. And until we get the full acknowledgement, either from the person or from Hashem, of our suffering, we think we will hold on to it. But, and this is a point, I believe it was Rabbi Jonas and Rosenblum who stressed, the proffer forgiveness is not the same thing as creating a situation as if nothing occurred. Rather, it's a refusal to blame the wrong or the wrongdoer for every negative aspect of our current life or emotional state, as if it's immutable. And so thus, while we think we're holding on for something valuable when we refuse to forgive, we're actually selling ourselves in the process. When we remain stuck waiting for that forgiveness, we're agreeing to allow our lives to be talui b'das acherim, to be dependent on someone else's opinion. Others whom we know are not worth being dependent upon, or they wouldn't have wronged us in the first place. To forgive is to open the door of the prison and step out of it, walking free. In other words, forgive is more freeing to you, the one forgiving, than even to the one who needs the forgiveness. You become more free. You become more in control of your own destiny than before. And perhaps that's why the Chafetz Chaim moved the section of forgiving others earlier in the Tefillah Zaka that is recited on Erev Yom Kippur than it was originally placed. For to be able to stand in front of Hashem on Yom Kippur, you first need to be able to know that you can stand. And by forgiving others, you find your own footing, and you have a place to stand in front of Hashem and bargain with him to forgive us as well. Again, maybe that's something that the woman in the bomb shelter understood too. Restricted in the movement and otherwise powerless to meet the needs of her chaos, with all the bombs and explosions going off all around her, she chose to take control over her chaos, if only in her own ability to forgive the past and be released from a different confinement that held her back from moving forward in life. She took that step. She was empowered to use it to stand before Hashem himself and brazenly ask that he do the same. Sometimes smallness has a distinct advantage in that, although it's initially seen as weakness and insignificant, it's actually a great advantage. When we own our size and our stature, we discover that we can move around obstacles quicker and get to places that are supposedly bigger things and bigger people and egos cannot. You see, when we accept our own stature, we can resist the need to react, to forgive others and ourselves in the process. We break our initial styles into better ones. And ironically, because of our smallness, we grow in the process. And maybe that's when the woman in the bomb shelter will stop haunting me. If she was able to effect Yeshua for all of Am Yisrael then, through her immediate and explosive realization of her power to forgive, instead of reacting and changing the tenor of her own role, you and I can do the same after an almost year of contemplation and meditation on what we can do, and use her as an image and a role model for us as well. to remember that when we're feeling most small, those are the moments that we're able to land the greatest impact on our lives, the lives of our loved ones, and those around us and around the world. Asking you and one another, please turn around and take advantage of the search for maklats, for shelter, to recognize B'tzilo chimadati v'yashafti, in the shade of Hashem, I found my shelter. I ask and wish you and yours a Gemar Chasima Tova, a hope for a wonderful and terrific year, and a Shabbat Shalom and Yom Kippur Tov to all.